Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official game podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. I didn't get the clip started in time, so I figured I'd introduce myself first. But let's listen to this clip from Shane Beamer yesterday.
After the game, I broke my foot on Saturday. So I'm just out there and say it and not have y'all speculating. And then after the game on Saturday in Missouri, you asked Tanner if he was okay with it, and he died laughing when I told him. So obviously, there's not a lot of empathy from him. It was after the game, and certainly that was a gut-wrenching emotional loss, and I was frustrated, and it's something that I shouldn't have kicked, and thought I was okay, but one of the game wore off before anybody starts the narrative like the head football coach frustrated and lost his poise and all that. No, I care. And I care about these kids. And I was really upset on Saturday night because I didn't do enough to help them get over the hump and win the football game. So don't think I have to have surgery, but there is a broken bone in my foot. It hurts like you know what, but I've got to show toughness and fight through it. Been one of the.
All right, so that was Shane Beamer yesterday. I guess someone had noticed that he kind of like limped into the press room and asked him if he needed to be added to the injury report. What's your take on that? Because I did see a clip from some national media earlier, specifically Paul Feinbaum, who was kind of, I guess it's his job to stir up controversy and all that fun stuff. But he was kind of saying that that's no way for a head coach to act and blah, 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 all those sorts of things. What's your take on that?
Got emotional after a tough game. He kicked something. I would say that's probably not an appropriate way to act in public or on a sideline or kicking something in front of a ref or something. But I don't know. It doesn't change a lot. I don't know. This is a 2-4 football team, and we're here to talk about a 2-4 football team. I don't think if they were 4-2, I'd have a different take on it. I think it's just kind of one of those football coach things. It's kind of funny. I mean, he said Ray Tanner was laughing about it. I also kind of, it's like, oh, I think that's about how everybody around here is feeling right now. Is kind of my first thought.
Yeah, I also thought he is the master of spin a little bit, right? He was like immediately getting out in front of the narrative, I guess, and was like, no, I just care about the kids. It's all about the kids,
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying he's not genuine. I do believe that he's a very passionate guy and does care very much about I think when they're playing this whole like family and welcome home sort of idea with recruiting and with the student athletes that are on campus, I do think that that's coming from a genuine place. But at the same time, he never, this is something we've noted in the past, he pretty much never loses an opportunity to sell that brand, I guess. And so even in this scenario, that was something that stood out to me. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I wouldn't have also kicked something after that game on Saturday night. So
yeah, I guess I just come back to if they win Saturday at Mizzou, I'm not going to be like they won because Shane Beamer got angry last week. And if they lose, I'm not going to be like they lost because Shane Beamer is too emotional. Like that just doesn't go either way. Like there's a football game between the lines. I know it's a national media's job to make stuff out of that, but I don't think I made nearly as much out of it as a lot of other people did.
Yeah, slow media day on the SEC network, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess that does kind of transition us into an interesting point, though. We talked a little bit on Sunday show or Monday show about it's kind of like put up or shut up time in this scenario. You have like a car revving.
Yeah, I don't know what that is behind me.
Oh, there we go.
I don't know
but it's all right. Anyway, but we talked on Monday's show that there was a little bit of a back against the wall and attitude adjustment. Maybe not even attitude adjustment, but there's definitely a moment here where it's a gut punch, and are you going to respond? And it sounds like there is at least some emotional motivation there coming there from Beamer. We also heard from several players in the individual press conferences this week about it being a really fiery day of practice yesterday. And so it does sound like, mindset wise at least, there is more of a revenge narrative, I guess, than a lay down and let the season get away from you narrative, at least mindset wise.
I don't know about revenge per se. I guess you could say there's a revenge thing. I don't know what's going on outside. Sorry. I think there's embarrassment, honestly, after what happened last week, the way that game ended defensively. You give up 41 points at home in a game you felt like you should have won. I think everyone in that room feels like they're better. I think especially kind of those corners, those safeties. We talked about that on the Monday show. I think everybody just kind of feels like they should be better than they are right now. And there's whether it's revenge, whether it's anger, whether it's whatever, I think everybody just kind of thinks it needs to be better and knows they have more in them than they've shown through 6 games.
All right, so let's start to look at whether or not we think that is something that can get corrected on the road in Missouri this week. Like we said on Monday, this is a game that you've lost for 4 straight years in a row. Missouri is obviously off to is it their best start under Drinkwitz? Probably, right?
It would have to be at 6-1, yeah.
We were talking before the game about some of the things that they do well. They have an electric athlete in Luther Burden who works really well in space. They've done a good job of getting him the ball in space and letting him hurt people that way. Defensively, they've already racked up 19 sacks on the season. That's definitely one of their strong points. They've also won the turnover battle throughout the season. I don't have the exact number, but we looked, they've thrown like 4 interceptions.
Brady Cook's good with the ball. Yep.
And I believe they have a DB that has 4 interceptions as an individual. Definitely have. Yeah, so they've sort of won that battle throughout the season so far. So I guess looking at the way that this matchup breaks down, where do you feel like South Carolina might have an advantage? Or are they going to have to kind of flip the script on some of the narratives that we've seen thus far?
I do think it starts with flipping the script. I think you talk about Mizzou, you're talking about Luther Bird, you're talking about the guy who I believe is second in the country in receiving yards right now. That is where it starts and ends. Look, when the chips are down, the secondary, these corners are going to have to make more plays than they did last week, are going to have to find a way to set, not just against Burden, but Theo Weiss is good. They can use Cody Schrader out of the backfield in the passing game too. He's questionable for Saturday, but if he plays, they're running back. I do think it starts there, but also if you feel like there is an advantage, maybe not advantage, but your offensive line, I think you feel pretty good about that right now. Maybe the best you have all year, just between what you saw after the bye week, the changes, Trey Jones, kind of the pin and pull stuff we talked about Monday, kind of getting your running game going a little bit with Anderson. Dowell Loggins said today that was the best the offensive line has played all year, and also the best it's gelled all year. I feel like I don't want to say you're going to get a running game going, but you feel better about your balance on offense right now than you have in a while. And that always gives you a chance to put up points.
Yeah. Mario Anderson definitely played his most complete game this past weekend. Like you said, the offensive line played their most complete game as a unit this past weekend. And I do think you probably have your best alignment in the one that they went with on Saturday. We've already seen that Loggins does a pretty good job of drawing up plays to get the ball out of Rattler's hands pretty quickly as well. Although it's funny to say that, even though they have 2 games, I guess, where they have 9 sacks. But even despite that, I think for the most part, the scheme has been pretty kind to working around some of those offensive line deficiencies. So I think we probably, in every game thus far and throughout the rest of the season, feel okay about South Carolina's chances of putting up points. The real question is going to be, can you clean up some of those missed tackle issues? Because we definitely have seen that Luther Burden and company are good in space. And if they make the first guy miss, they very quickly can be gone for a big play. And also defensively, can you get any pressure on Brady Cook, which is something that they really struggled last Saturday against Graham Mertz. And I would say Brady Cook's probably a little bit of an upgrade in the quarterback department.
Yeah, he's definitely an upgrade mobility-wise, at least. He's going to be able to move a little bit more than Mertz did. Pressure is kind of the theme of the week here. Obviously, that's what started the whole domino effect with Shane Beamer on Saturday, talking about calling pressures and not running them. He clarified those comments a little bit, saying they just need to be a little bit more aggressive when they run pressures. Clayton White was talking today about how they need to do a better job of teaching technique on pressures. I think the bottom line is when you call a pressure, it's got to get home. It's got to make the quarterback feel it, especially when whether we know it's more talented or not, or we think it can be better. Your secondary is struggling right now. You got to get home there. But let me ask you this. Is that the way to go Saturday? Is pressuring the quarterback and putting receivers on islands against this Mizzou group, is that the best way to go about this? Because I'm not sure if it is. I mean, obviously you can't call zero pressures in 70, 80 snap game, but in general, is that the way to do this?
Yeah, so let's look a little bit at the rushing numbers. Generally, Missouri, that's been something that they've leaned on in the past, but so far this year, they're kind of average running the ball. They're averaging 4 yards an attempt, about 138 yards a game. Obviously, that's not bad by any stretch, especially if you compare it to, say, South Carolina's first 4 games of the season or something. But they aren't leaning on it as heavy as, say, Florida was heading into that game last week. So I do think that you can probably stack the box a little bit less. Like we said on Monday, South Carolina dared Graham Mertz to beat them, and Graham Mertz beat them. I think the mindset's probably a little bit different defensively heading into this one when you do have the elite receivers on the outside that Missouri has. I mean, Florida obviously had Pearsall, but we talked about last week that even he is not like a game breaker sort of receiver, right? He's just going to be reliable for you, and was every time that there was a 3rd and long or whatever. So yeah, I do think that the mindset's probably going to be a little bit differently. We're probably going to see a little bit more zone and some over the top protection from those safeties instead of leaving those corners on an island like we saw last week.
Would you bracket / double Luther Burden? Just starting there. I understand Mizzou has other playmakers who can beat you, and you got to trust your D tackles, especially enough to hold up in maybe a lighter box if Mizzou can run into it, your linebackers. But would you just say Luther Burden's not beating us and kind of do what Tennessee did against Leggett, 3 weeks ago now?
I think that definitely has to at least be part of the strategy. I don't know if you're doing it on every single play,
right?
But on obvious passing downs, I think that's something to look into. And it's honestly something that we've seen as part of Clayton White's strategy in the last 3 years is he does try to take away the best player, or the thing that the offense wants to do. And again, last week they did do that. It just didn't work out.
Right, Mertz beat him instead. Yeah,
exactly. You got Florida out of the thing that you would expect them to do, but they were able to still be effective regardless. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they end up trying to take Burden out of the game, but then that ratchets up the pressure on whoever's on Theo Weiss or whoever's on, insert name here on the other side.
Yeah, and I think there's a linebacker question to be had here too. Stone Blanton didn't play, I don't know exactly when he went out last week, but he wasn't there in the 4th quarter, and you noticed it. Questionable for this week. I wouldn't count on him at least being his usual self, as I think how I would put it right now. All right, so that probably means a tick for Pup Howard and snaps. I would be surprised if Debo Williams, if Stone's out, Debo probably plays every snap or pretty close to it. Bam Martin Scott. We've heard Andrew Colasurdo, Ronnie Porter, Jaron Willis's names. We haven't seen much of Willis at all. That's the Ole Miss transfer, came in before the year, but we've heard his name a little bit more lately. Beamer said he had a really good bye week. I think your linebacker rotation, or how much rotation you can have at all, comes into play here too, because maybe this is the week you figure it out in the back end a little bit and you keep Burden and Weiss from beating you, and then you're kind of back to square one. You got to figure out how to stop Cody Schrader if he plays in a pretty efficient running game.
Yeah, some of those names you mentioned, it's kind of hard to judge because we haven't been able to see a ton of them in action in 2023. If I'm looking and thinking back to like the potential of those names, and we look back to like a high school career where Jerron Willis was a 4-star, highly rated recruit before he went to Ole Miss, you would think he has the most upside, but I've been kind of surprised that he hasn't factored into the mix thus far, which would tell me maybe he was underperforming or whatever early on. I mean, it's good that he got mentioned again in the bye week, so maybe he's starting to come along and the light's starting to come along for him. Either way, if Stone Blanton's out, that there's no way around the fact that is a downgrade. Even though I think Pup Howard has played pretty well for a true freshman, he's played kind of on the level that we saw Stone Blanton as a true freshman last year, where there was still some obvious deficiencies. And it won't surprise me at all if Pup Howard is elevated next year, just like Stone Blanton elevated this year. But right now, your two best are Blanton and Debo, so that'll be tough to see. So yeah, he got a questionable designation. Any other injuries that we should know about heading into this one?
Yep, Juice Wells out again. I don't think anybody's surprised at that point or this point. That'll be 4 in a row for Juice out, really 5 because he just played the one drive against Georgia. That timeline just keeps getting moved back for him. Casey Henry practiced this week, we heard, for the first time in, I guess, North Carolina week, but he's not going to play Saturday, but he's getting there. I think he maybe has some optimism about November there. Trying to think what else. Ja'Kai Moore, good to go again. He didn't play last week, but he was healthy. Beamer said he's fine there. Mario Anderson, good to go. He had a bit of what was it? Was it a quad injury?
Yeah, I mean they said knee on broadcast.
Knee, well, yeah,
something with his leg. Yeah,
yeah, and they noted the Thubman thing before the game too. But he's fine. We had him for media Tuesday. He looked good to go. And then Vershawn Lee is doubtful, which I probably should have mentioned. We talked about the offensive line. He moved from center to right tackle last week. And Sidney Fugar had his right tackle reps in the second half after Lee got hurt. I'm not expecting Vershawn Lee to play Saturday, but also Sidney Fugar looked better last week. I don't have the PFF grade in front of me or anything, but you were still able to move the ball, get a running game going, kind of do what you need to do. He scored 16 points in the second half, which, I mean, no one's throwing you a party over 16 points and a half, but that wasn't debilitating without Vershawn Lee in there. You'd rather have him, but I think you still maybe feel okay about what you can do with Fugar at right tackle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think that's obviously a hit because I thought the alignment looked best when you had Lee at tackle. Maybe he looked best. That probably was your best right tackle play all year. The
first half of the Florida game.
Yeah. But I agree that it did seem like Sidney Fugar looked a little bit better. He graded out as a 60.3 on 36 snaps compared to Vershawn Lee's 62.2 on 30 snaps. So yeah, not too far behind. And actually, Fugar compared to the rest of the O-line was only behind Lee in rating. So he actually outperformed, according to PFF, which is not always perfect, especially with offensive line ratings, but he actually outperformed everyone else on the offensive line on Saturday. So as long as no one else gets hurt, you feel okay.
That's
about that.
That kind of year up front, something Shane Beamer was talking about Tuesday. But you just think about Jalen Nichols in the spring game and Casey Henry in literally the first drive of the season, and Vershawn Lee now, Ja'Kai Moore getting hurt, even guys like Ryan Brubaker who got hurt during camp. You're just thin there right now. It doesn't get any easier every week, but you're hoping at least Fugar can kind of stem the tide a little bit.
I guess my next question about Missouri is, how good do you think the Missouri team really is? So obviously we said that they're 6-1, but if you look back over their season, it's been kind of a slow build, I guess, before we actually believed they were legit. There was a reason that they were not ranked prior to this week, even though they were 5-1 heading into that game. So they beat South Dakota, Middle Tennessee. They almost lost to Middle Tennessee, which I think was pretty alarming and scary for any Missouri fan at that point. They only won that one 23-19. Then they pull off a close win against Kansas State. That
walk-off field goal. Yep.
Yeah, most people were picking Kansas State to win. Another close win against Memphis, who is not bad, but 34-27. And then they beat Vanderbilt. Everyone beats Vanderbilt. And then I think when they really started to open people's eyes was the last couple of weeks, where they had a very close loss to LSU. And then, of course, beat a ranked Kentucky team that I also don't think we really knew how good or not they were. Granted, they did just beat the team that South Carolina lost to on Saturday. So I guess all of that to say, where does Missouri rank in terms of difficulty of games left on the schedule, in terms of maybe comparison to the first 6 games of the season for South Carolina. Yeah, I mean, how realistic is it that South Carolina could go into Columbia, Missouri and win this one, you think?
I think I would kind of flip the question a little bit. Is not so much how good is Missouri? Can Missouri do this? First of all, Missouri's good enough to beat South Carolina. I think that goes on. So obviously Missouri can win this game. South Carolina can. What does Mizzou not do well is kind of how I would flip it. This is not a perfect football team by any means. They have a loss. You just kind of look at it and go, all right, pretty good quarterback who takes care of the ball, game-breaking wide receivers, offensive lines played pretty well. D-line's active. I sound like Beamer on a Tuesday right now, but special teams, you got a kicker who hit a 61-yard field goal earlier this year. You got Burden at punt returner. Corners, you got the guy leading the country in passes defended right now in Abrams Drain. Kind of where can you get them? And I think if you just try to look for something, it's the running game. That LSU game, they gave up almost 300 rushing yards. Logan Diggs was a big part of that for LSU. Last week, Ray Davis ran the ball for 128 yards on 20 carries. Devin Leary had a rushing touchdown from short range too last week. This team is very good. It is going to be a very tough environment. I don't think they're infallible. I think if you can run the ball, if you can kind of stack what you did last week a little bit in the running game, keep Mario Anderson going, keep finding your spots for Juju McDowell, something else I know we talked about it Monday. They did a good job of last week. You can shorten this game a little bit, and you just – I think maybe I'm saying a lot of words, say the short part out loud. This team's got to win a game in the fourth quarter. We talked about it Monday. You said the word learning how to win, which I think was the right way to do it. This team can and probably will have this game into the fourth quarter. I don't think they're going to get completely blown out, but you just kind of waiting for someone to make a game-flipping play late in one of these games. And that's kind of where I still have the question of who's going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and along that note, I think one of the big stories isn't necessarily a talent versus talent one, but more of a mindset one. How are you feeling after that heartbreaking loss? How are you feeling having to travel on your longest road trip of the season thus far against a team that you traditionally have struggled against in a place that's kind of weird to play traditionally? I don't know if it's just because the angle on TV looks so weird, but it always just feels like a weird vibe at Missouri. So, really, are you just going to come out and compete and punch them in the mouth first and early? Because I think this is a situation where if Missouri were to hop out to an early lead, it could get pretty sketchy pretty fast based on just the way last week went and the general precipice that things seem to be sitting on right now. I believe you called them on the edge of the cliff on Monday.
Yeah, I think there's kind of the example I would use maybe is the Arkansas game last year. Obviously, that's a completely different circumstance. You're 1-0 in week 2. But you go down 21-3 early, you can't get stops, and the game's over at that point. You can fight back a little bit. I definitely don't question this team's fight or think they're going to go in and just lay down on Saturday. But you get down 21-3 quick, and there's here we go again, and they lost that game. It was at 44-30. I think that's a very legitimate concern that, yes, we do need to see this team win a game in the fourth quarter, make that big stop, go on that late drive, but you got to get the game there. And this is a Missouri team obviously capable of explosive plays. We haven't even talked about the red zone yet, but they're 30 for 31 scoring points in the red zone this year. It's one of the best in the country, obviously, at that clip. So if Mizzou gets down there, they're usually going to score. You got to stay in this game long enough to seal it, I think, is kind of the mindset.
Another storyline here, I think that is both for this game, but also for the season at large, starting to see some freshmen get more and more involved. Notably, Nick Harbor came up a lot in the media availability throughout the week this week. Last week, obviously, he had one pretty big catch. We talked about how he's still developing the fullness of his route tree. Any takeaways, I guess, from the way that Dowell Loggins talked about him today? We got to speak with Harbor himself yesterday about how he's coming along at this halfway point of the season. Obviously, had some pretty big expectations as the highest rated recruit of the Shane Beamer era thus far, highest rated recruit of the 2023 class. And it sounds like, I don't know, he's sort of on track as long as you were realistic about what that track was.
You said it right there. I thought what Dowell Logan said today was perfect, and I'd encourage you to go back and watch it if you haven't. He said Nick Harbour knows where he is. He understands what the expectations were. He understands his own game. He understands where he is in what are we in now? Week 8 compared to week 1. And he understands he still has a lot of work to do, but he knows kind of what he has, the talent he has, and where that's kind of going in the future. I think that's about it, though. He stayed on course, right? I think a lot of people were frustrated. Why is he not getting the ball more? Why is he not playing more? You recruit a 5-star, he's not playing. I think they've taken a very methodical approach to trying to develop Nick Harbour into what they think he can be. And he's earned the reps right now at wide receiver. I think it was 29 snaps last week against Florida. And even just the threat of him on the field is still something for defenses to account for, just the speed and the body frame going down the field.
Yeah, I still stand by what I've been saying. You got to take a shot to him at least once or twice a game. You just don't have very many 6'6" guys out there that can run a 4.3. You certainly don't have very many DBs that can match up with that guy in a one-on-one battle. Now, I do think he's still learning how to use his body and all those sorts of things. But one thing I did notice on his catch last week, he didn't necessarily high point it. He caught it in his chest, but he did box out a much smaller DB to get in front of that ball. So, yeah, I mean, as long as he knows how to use that frame, I think good things will happen. Any other, I guess, coordinator or player takeaways? I did notice that Clayton White didn't speak very long. Maybe for the best, considering how the defense played on Saturday. I know that there's been some rumblings on message boards and on Twitter putting a lot of the blame on Saturday at his feet. I guess, what were the vibes of his media availability today? Does it feel like he's resilient and ready to get back out there and show what the defense can do? Or I don't know, maybe that didn't come across at all, but
that came across. But I also think, I don't want to use the word anxiety. I don't want to put words in Clayton's mouth. I think there's just a very clear understanding that this is not good enough. This is not what anybody can accept. He used the word, I think he used the word unacceptable, talking about the last 5 minutes of the game, and just that's not a standard for any football team, let alone this one, the expectations in our building. I think he understands. I mean, obviously he knows as well as anybody that something's got to come around here. You can't be giving up 40 points a game every week the rest of the year, even every SEC game the rest of the year, and feel good about it. It was a lot more about just technique, about coaching, about putting guys in the right positions. I talked about that with the pressures again. I think that's all well and good to say. I'm not sure how much you can change on that week 7 to week 8. I think that's got to be more of an off-season, a fall camp thing, a spring ball thing, than maybe you have 6 days to turn around, which you did last week before you go on another road game. I think that's kind of where I would put it mainly. Is just how much can you really fix in a week?
I will say I called last week's performance the worst defensive effort of the Shane Beamer era. And by effort, I don't mean like people weren't trying.
Right.
It was the worst performance. How about that? And I think in order for it to culminate that way, that means several people had some of the worst games of their career thus far, which isn't going to happen every single week. So even though I was pretty down about the way the defense performed on Saturday, I think it's possible that was the low point of the season, and that there are plenty of talented players at pretty much every level of this defense. And there is some upside if they can put it all together. And the upside doesn't even have to be that high because the offense has been playing pretty well throughout the year. You just have to make more stops and get off the field in those key spots, which you were clearly unable to do last week.
Yeah, I think you said it right there. I used the term rock bottom on Saturday in what I wrote, and I think I don't want to say it can't get worse because it's football. We all know that anything can get worse. Luther Burden's on the other side on Saturday, but
I'll knock on wood for you.
I don't want to say that, but I do think there is a certain element of, I think we all know these guys are a little bit better than this. We all watched Nicky Manwuri, DQ Smith, Marcellus Dial, Donald Fortune, David Spalding last year. Like, it's not like you turn this whole room over and you guys are trying to figure out how to play together.
And you were literally a couple plays away at several points on Saturday to where there might have been questions afterwards, but there isn't the level of gloom and doom that there has been this past week. There's a Donald Fortune near interception that would have ended the game. There's 3 4th downs that would have ended the game. Obviously, you didn't make those plays. That's why we're here. But I think it's the old adage: nothing's as bad as your worst week seems, and nothing's as good as your best week seems.
Yep, I think that's probably a good way to put it. I think you're still waiting for that best week for this defense, because even Georgia week, you could say they played pretty well. They hung in there, but they got worn down in the second half. You're still waiting for that kind of complete. I'm kind of thinking about Kentucky last year. I know they're facing a backup quarterback, but they just completely shut down Kentucky's passing game, Kentucky's offense pretty much that whole night. Certainly wouldn't say you shut down. Actually, I was going to say you didn't shut them down, but you think about that Clemson game last year. You gave up 30 points, although I believe Clemson had a pick 6 early. I wouldn't say you played well. I wouldn't say you were perfect against Clemson, but you took your punches. You bowed up in the red zone. You kept your offense in the game long enough where, hey, if you guys can score 30 points, 31 in that case, you can win. I think that's maybe your blueprint right now if you're just trying to find a path for this defense. Just can you keep this in the game long enough for the offense to win it? And yes, the offense still has to steal it. We've talked about that on Monday on that last drive of the game, the last drive of the first half. But maybe that Clemson game last year is a little bit of a blueprint for what this needs to look like.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. All right, let's lock in those predictions. I mean, you still have time to write your story for Friday night, so I guess you can change it a little bit. But how are you feeling out on Wednesday of this week for the final score and what you're going to predict?
Saying it Wednesday, 31-24 Mizzou. It's one of those things where right now I can't give South Carolina the benefit of the doubt till they go out and win one of these games. You got to go out and show me you can make the plays late, that you can go win on the road, which they're 0-3 away from Columbia this season. That you can kind of do all the things we've talked about them being capable of doing. But I will add, if we're sitting here on Sunday or Monday, whenever we get back to it, talking about a South Carolina upset win, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, so I feel like I might have picked South Carolina to win every game except for Georgia this year so far. Obviously, that hasn't worked out for me. So let's flip the script. I'm going to pick Missouri to win, and then I'll probably be wrong again, but I'll be wrong in the other direction at least, I guess. So right now the line is Missouri -7. That's moved a little bit in the direction of South Carolina. I believe it opened at 7.5 or 8.
See, people betting Gamecocks. Yeah. Weird spot.
I think that line sounds pretty close. Let's say like 27-22. We're going to have something weird happen. 27-22, Missouri over South Carolina.
You say something weird there in a Missouri win. Is there any way South Carolina wins this game and there's not something weird?
Well, I have them losing, but I think there's going to be weirdness.
No, I know. But like, if there's weird, it's South Carolina, Missouri. We're at 10 years on the Mizzou miracle this week. Maybe this is the week.
You very old just now.
Maybe this is the week you finally block a punt. Maybe you flip a game that way. Brady Cook takes care of the ball well, but maybe you can get a turnover somewhere there. It feels like the kind of game this team would win when everybody's more down on them than people have been in probably any point in the Shane Beamer era. That doesn't mean I'm going to pick it, but it does feel like one of those weird South Carolina wins.
No, I absolutely agree that if things are going to continue kind of on the trajectory that they have throughout the Beamer era, where everyone's down and counting them out, and then they play the best game of the season thus far, this feels like a good spot for it. And that wouldn't shock me one bit. All right, let's look around the country just a little bit. Actually, before we do that, let's talk a little bit more South Carolina. So women's basketball preseason polls just came out. I believe South Carolina was ranked number 6. Does that sound right? We will have plenty more coverage on that. I think, hopefully, 99.5% sure. Alan is going to go to Paris to cover South Carolina versus
Notre Dame. Top 10 matchup.
That's going to be a really cool experience. So, yeah, got basketball right around the corner. The men's team, SEC Media Days, is this week. the men were picked last in the SEC.
Yeah, Lamont talked about that today.
I was just say I did see that he said he didn't see how they would be picked last, or he didn't see them finishing last, or something like that. I actually tend to agree with that. You have most of your contributors coming back. Plus, I think made some pretty savvy moves in the portal this offseason. So I don't know. I personally picked them more at like 10, 11 sort of range than 14th. But we'll talk way more basketball probably next week as we're getting really
Getting
close
into it, yeah.
to that season.
For what it's worth, your pick last year finished last. You finished 12th in the league, so you beat that by 2 spots.
Right. And I think pretty much inarguably your team should be better this year than last year. Now, maybe everyone else in the SEC elevates
It's
too.
a deep league this year. That'd be my one concern. It's an eight bid tournament league, maybe, honestly.
Yeah. So it's definitely gonna be tough. It's an uphill battle. You do not have a Gigi Jackson or anyone in that ballpark, I guess, as far as an individual player goes. But I also want to remind people that there was that period where Gigi Jackson was having whatever attitude adjustment that he needed last year. That the team played pretty well without him on the floor, and it wouldn't surprise me if overall the team is better, despite not having maybe the upside that of an individual like they had with Gigi. Anyway, we'll talk more basketball a little bit later. Let's talk about some national football games. I haven't filled out my picks yet this week, but you have. And I'll just make some on the fly right here. We don't have to do every single one of these, but let's talk about some of the big ones. So obviously, probably the game of the week. Penn State is at Ohio State. Ohio State is favored by -4.5 right now. How are you feeling about that?
I'm hedging my bets by picking Ohio State to win, but not cover. I'm not trusting James Franklin in a big game spot, and I'm also not trusting this version of Ohio State right now. Just kind of what I've seen from them, some of the struggles on offense. Obviously, someone's got to win the game. I'd take Ohio State at home, maybe by like a field goal. But if Penn State's ever going to do this thing, the time is like now. This is a pretty vulnerable Ohio State team, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I think I'm going to pick Penn State just because I think, like you said, Ohio State hasn't looked nearly as dominant this year as they have in the past. And this is one of James Franklin's best teams at Penn State. So we'll see. Like, it's tough with the primetime narrative because also so many of those games have been against like some of the best teams over the last decade. So, this one isn't. We'll see how that plays out. Tennessee and Bama. We got the rematch
Saturday. Yep.
So that is Bama -9.5 at home versus Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee won that one last year in their coming out party that kind of elevated them to the top of the country before South Carolina had their moment against them. How are you feeling about that one playing out? That line seems way too big for me. But
it feels like too many points, but also you're walking into a trap. It's on the other side of 10, so you're getting the key number there if you wanted to bet Alabama. It feels like too many points, and I think I did pick Tennessee to cover and Alabama to win. But we've seen Joe Milton in one big road environment this year, and that was a pretty resounding loss at a team that's good. Florida's good, I think we can say now, but not Alabama, not that stadium, not a revenge game, Nick Saban team. I'll tepidly take Tennessee to cover, but also if Alabama won like 34-10, I probably wouldn't blink.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same mindset that I think there's too many points. Tennessee should be able to keep pace and cover. Alabama hasn't looked all that impressive offensively. Tennessee still has, obviously, some guns in the holster offensively. That said, Alabama is the best team that Tennessee will have played thus far defensively. But also, is Tennessee's defensive front the best that Alabama's faced thus far?
James Pierce is.
So
you see what that can do, yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if it turns into a little bit of a ugly game, something like 24-20, something like that.
And you're getting 9.5, so.
Right. All right, we got Duke at Florida State. This is another one that the line feels kind of big to me. So Florida State's favored by 14. Obviously, I do think Florida State is better than Duke. I think it's possible that that line's like right on the money, but it just feels large for the spot.
Walking into a trap, but I'm picking Florida State to just drop a bomb here. I think they're really good. It's a night game at home. Duke, impressive. Probably should have beat Notre Dame. Did beat Clemson, but you also look at the rest of that. It's Lafayette, Northwestern, UConn, an NC State team that I think we all agree is not very good. It's just a hornet's nest road spot, and I think Florida State proves they're a top 5 team.
Yeah, I mean, Duke is going to have to ugly it up. If Florida State can get out to a early 2-score lead or something, I could very easily see it spiraling out of control. But if Duke can start fast and kind of make the game interesting early, I could see it go into a fourth quarter game pretty easily as well. All right, we got Utah at USC. USC is favored at -6.5, despite all of the negative press this week following, I guess, some shaky decision making the last few weeks that have led to games being closer than expected against inferior opponents, and Utah is not an inferior opponent.
Yeah, it's the bounce back question for USC. Just after getting, I mean, again, you're talking about South Carolina getting embarrassed, but Southern Cal was at 48-20 last week in South Bend against Notre Dame. I like USC to bounce back. I just don't think they're going to play that poorly 2 weeks in a row. A little bit of an up-down theory. Utah, you get them out of Salt Lake. That team's not nearly as good. Away from home, I don't know, though.
Feels like very points. I've been saying that on every game so far, but
hesitantly taking USC. Would not be surprised if Utah just plugs and plays Notre Dame's game plan and runs the ball. I'm counting on Caleb Williams not to throw 3 picks again. Is kind of what I'm counting on, just that he won't be that bad 2 weeks in a row, but we'll see. That's a pretty good defense there for Utah.
Yeah, or there's something fundamentally broken there, and it's going to get doubly exposed this week. I don't know. They haven't played well since the Colorado game?
And even that game,
I would say since the first half of the Colorado game.
Yeah, that'd probably be the last time.
And then another one that I guess is relevant to those that would listen to this podcast: Clemson -2.5 at Miami.
Good luck figuring that one out.
I mean, Miami doesn't really have much of a home field advantage usually, so I don't know that the road spot matters that much, but I do think it's possible that Miami is the better overall team at this point. Maybe.
Am I wrong for thinking the wheels are just off for Miami after the way they lost to Georgia Tech? Then you go to Chapel Hill last week and Tez Walker dunks all over you for 4 quarters. Like, am I wrong for just thinking the wheels are going to come off?
That's fair. I don't know that Clemson has anyone on offense that can dunk on Miami in the same way. So I think at the very least, it could turn into a game of like bully ball or whatever, and we'll see how that goes. I do think Miami matches up defensively better against a team like Clemson that's going to just try to run the ball down your throat than against someone that has athletes on the outside and Drake May. So we'll see.
Right.
Any other games this week that you wanted to get to?
Oh, let's take a look. It's a pretty good game tomorrow. James Madison and Marshall. It's kind of for some Sun Belt control. I think I picked Marshall there at home on a Thursday night just to give JMU their first loss. I'm trying to look what else we have on the schedule this week.
I'm scrolling as well.
Do you dare to bet the under at 31 points on Minnesota, Iowa? Could you take an under that low?
I mean, that sounds about right, honestly.
31. I've never seen it over under in the 31.
Last week, Iowa, Wisconsin, only 21 points combined. So
I'm not saying the line's wrong. I just never seen one that low.
Let's see. Iowa hasn't given up more than 16 points in a game yet this season. So let's say they gave up 16 points again, then they would have to score at least 15. They've only scored 15 themselves
twice, maybe
3 times all season. So 4. They did blow out Western Michigan as well, but yeah, I don't know. I probably would not have the balls to take the under now.
I don't think I could do that.
Because I mean,
Ole Miss and Auburn. Oh, go ahead.
No, I am talking too long about this, but you even look at like the Iowa Purdue game. Iowa won 20-14. It was an ugly offensive game on both sides, and that's still 34 points. So, sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
No, just Ole Miss Auburn. You got Hugh Freeze against his old school. It's kind of Auburn needing an SEC win. They're 0-3 in the league right now, and then you got Ole Miss, who's still just got the one loss to Bama, but they're going on the road. They haven't been very good. Chance for a Hugh Freeze upset special and then weird night game at Jordan-Hare.
I just don't think Auburn's good enough to, honestly. I mean, you look at the Georgia game, which I think probably duped everyone into believing that they're a little further along than they are. But outside of that, their SEC games, they got blown out by a not that good, hasn't shown much Texas A&M team, and then they got absolutely destroyed last week at LSU. I just don't think that they have the ponies yet to compete, but I think they'll get there. I think that was a good hire for them, despite all the moral reasons that it probably wasn't.
That's a more interesting game next year when he has to go back to Oxford than it is this year with Auburn at home.
Yeah,
assuming that's even on the schedule next year. I haven't even looked. The opponents are still
Michigan State. Michigan's going to win that one by 100. Yeah, that's all I really see. That's super intriguing. Does Washington have any sort of letdown against Arizona State? Probably not. Probably
not at home. It feels like a sleepy road game, but they're staying at home this week. Just waiting for Washington to play USC and Utah those back-to-back weeks in November.
Yeah, so we have several teams, I guess, at the top of the polls that are still undefeated. Any guesses on how all that's going to play out at this point?
Like a mid-season playoff pick kind of thing?
Yeah, let's do it. Why not?
I'm trying to remember.
Here, let me give you. I'll say let me give you a rundown of the undefeated teams real quick. So we have
11, I think.
Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Oklahoma, Penn State, North Carolina, Air Force. Those are the undefeated
James
teams.
Madison.
Are they? Are they not in the top 25 still?
I don't know if they're ranked, but I know they're
You're right. They're 26th. They're the top receiving votes.
Okay.
So, all right, James Madison as well.
I wasn't putting them in the playoff anyway. I don't think they're even allowed to go. They're still on the FCS transition. But I'll stick with Georgia until proven otherwise, even though I have Brock Bowers questions with him being hurt now. So that's one. I had Florida State preseason and haven't been given a reason to back off of that yet. So that's two. Gonna need a Big Ten team. Take Michigan. I know they haven't played anybody, but they've been dominant against their schedule so far. I still think they're the best team there. I think they'll be able to run the ball, and Penn State and Ohio State win those games.
So I think the things they do well are going to, or have already shown to be a problem for Ohio State.
That's Georgia, Michigan, Florida State. I'll take Washington. Yeah. I'm just going to have some fun, and I want Michael Penix to make the playoff.
I mean, they're already through the hardest game of their schedule, but I feel like the Pac-12 always gets weird at the end of the year. Yeah. So
the problem's going to be if they lose one weird game to Utah or Oregon State or whoever, and then it's like you have Oklahoma undefeated, Florida State. You have 4 undefeated Power 5 champs, and they're on the outside with one loss would be the problem.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma is pretty intriguing, but I think they're probably going to have to beat Texas again, and I think that could go either way. And North Carolina, they're not. I don't think they're the most complete team by any stretch, but they have one of the easiest schedules left, and as long as they can get past.
You know what they have left? If you looked at it, I have it open now.
No, I haven't. Give it to me.
All right, Virginia this week at Georgia Tech. Yep, those should be wins.
Win. Yeah.
I mean, Georgia Tech was weird with Miami, but then they have Campbell in November FCS game. So South Carolina has it's like Jack State. Yep, and then Duke at home, at Clemson, at NC State to end the year. So a couple of rivalry games and an at Clemson there would be your 3 games. That they should be 9-0 is my point. 9-0 going into Duke.
I think that Duke Clemson stretch is your season for sure. Yeah. And I think it helps to have that Campbell game after Georgia Tech too, because that feels like one that would get weird, but there's nothing to look ahead to really. So
that's your bye week playing an FCS opponent before Duke Clemson. And you get the Duke game at home. It's just the at Clemson would probably, even though Clemson's down, would still be a tough environment, obviously. And the game you got to find a way to win.
The thing is, I think if you have 5 undefeated teams and North Carolina's the 5th,
they're the ones that are out.
So
yeah,
that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. All right. Safe travels to Columbia, Missouri, Alan. And we will be on. Well, we have plenty more preview coming up on GamecocksScoop.com, and then on Saturday we will have a live chat. It's been pretty fun to run those so far. So if you haven't checked that out yet, do that on Saturday around